If this agreement fails anywhere, it will fail here. For this is Hebron, the West Bank city where Jews and Arabs live in an atmosphere of bitterness and hostility. If this agreement fails anywhere, it will fail here. If this agreement fails anywhere, it will fail here. For this is Hebron, the West Bank city where Jews and Arabs live in an atmosphere of bitterness and hostility. Why do I want you in my stand? If this agreement fails anywhere, it will fail here. For this is Hebron, the West Bank city where Jews and Arabs live in an atmosphere of bitterness and hostility. The dreams of reconciliation are far away.
لازم سواق يصور ما ينفعش لكن
If this agreement fails anywhere, it will fail here. For this is Hebron, where Jews and Arabs live in an atmosphere of bitterness and hostility, where reconciliation remains the most distant of dreams. If this agreement fails anywhere, it will fail here. For this is Hebron, a city where Jews and Arabs live in an atmosphere of hostility and bitterness. Here, the dreams of reconciliation
I support the peace process because this is the only light. We have to rule ourselves. It's the beginning, the first step. We receive order to go or to come, to sit down or to stand up, to eat this and not to eat this even till now. I can't go anywhere where I want to go. You know, I have 2 kilometers around this chair to go. I can't go further. If anybody, any soldier want to send me back, I have to come, to return back. I have to return.
I think we've never faced such a horrible situation as the situation we're facing now. 29 years of occupation. This is the worst we ever faced. This is the worst we ever experienced. And it's the peace process. And it's 1996.
President Clinton shakes with Israeli Prime Minister Rabin and with PLO leader Yasser Arafat, and then graces each of them calling for a handshake, and there it is.
Interesting body language as Chairman Arafat reached across the president. Did you see President Clinton touch Prime Minister Rabin on his left shoulder?
There are many, many people, Bernie, in the Middle East peace process analysis community who would be spinning in their graves if they knew that Yasser Arafat had just shaken hands with Yitzhak Rabin.
What happened in Oslo was really a victory for American foreign policy, and it was also a victory for Israeli policy, naturally. The global situation at that time was really so opportune for both America and Israel. And so the Palestinians were facing a very difficult situation. At the local level, at the regional level, they were deprived of any Arab support. And at the global level, they were facing a new world order that was based on US hegemony. That is not really to say that the only alternative for the Palestinians was to surrender, basically, which is what they did in Oslo.
October 1947. 2 shiploads of Jewish refugees from Europe attempt to land in Palestine, only to be turned away by the British and shipped to internment on Cyprus.
The Security Council is determined not to permit the situation in Palestine to threaten international peace.
War between the armies of the surrounding Arab states and Jewish Palestine.
The new government, headed by David Ben-Gurion, is installed in Tel Aviv. The Jewish people have a nation of their own.
The State of Israel was declared in 1948 on the land of Palestine. Most of the Arab inhabitants were driven from their homeland.
750,000 Palestine Arab refugees are living in makeshift tents in the Sinai Desert in Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. The camps are badly overcrowded.
Many of these displaced Palestinians and their descendants live in refugee camps to this day.
أنا من عجور وطالعين سنة 48. أنا كان عمري سنة 51 طاح أبوي على دارنا، يعني يشوف الشوح وال دارنا، فاليهود طخوا عليه وقتلوه مات. فهو أخذوا أرضنا ودارنا وغنمنا وقتلوا أبويا، قتلوه. طيب جينا هان على الفوار، أنا كنت طفل صغيرة يعني، أعطوا الناس خيام، أعطوا كل واحد خيمة، وصاروا يعطوا في الشهر كيس طحين ونتفة زيت وهيك الاشي، وعشنا اللي عشناه. أنا كبرت واتجوزت، تتجوزت خلفت هالولاد، وأخذنا نتفة الدار هذه الأرضيات هذه وقمنا الخيمة وبنيناها، بنينا بنا يعني ما لناش غيرها.
Another 400,000 refugees were displaced in 1967 when Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. The Palestinians of these occupied territories have remained under Israeli military rule ever since. In 1987, a spontaneous rebellion erupted that changed the world's image of the Palestinians, the Intifada. An unarmed population stood up to its occupiers and demanded independence. Years of conflict followed, along with demands for an international peace conference, but the United States insisted that Israel and the Palestinians negotiate directly. This ensured that any agreement they reached would reflect the imbalance of power between them. After 2 years of failed talks, the two sides suddenly announced an agreement reached behind the scenes, the Oslo Peace Accord. Oslo called for an interim Palestinian Authority to take control in phases over a 5-year period. The PLO would first take over the Gaza Strip and the West Bank town of Jericho. There were to be free elections for a Palestinian council and a strong Palestinian police force to ensure public order. The most serious issues between the two sides were deferred until the final status negotiations. The key unresolved issues included Israeli settlements, Palestinian refugees, and Palestinian control over East Jerusalem.
Jerusalem stands as one of the most important problems we are facing. Since the Gulf War, 1991, Jerusalem was closed, whether totally or permanently, in front of Palestinians. And the effect was really tremendous because Jerusalem used to serve as our capital in a sense of having most of our educational system, health, religious aspirations oriented towards there. Closing Jerusalem in front of Palestinians meant starting the process of death for East Jerusalem. And you can see that clearly, that most of the merchants there are leaving their jobs because there are no customers. Most of their customers were coming from our areas. Most of our well-equipped hospitals are sited in Jerusalem, and that's making life much more painful for people because they cannot access adequate medical treatment. Churches and mosques are becoming more of museums. I'm dreaming about the day in which I'll be able simply to go to the church in Jerusalem and pray. Unfortunately, I can't do that. I don't know how it's possible that someone who wants to go and pray needs a permit from the military governor of the area he lives in, and in most of the times, he's denied access.
Many times I asked for permission, they refused to give me. I saw a yellow car. I told him, can you take me to Jerusalem? He said, oh, I will show you a way you can go behind the Tantur and you can drop there. And I don't know this way. I moved through the olive trees and I saw a woman. She told me you can climb this mountain and go down. And I walked from that way till I went to Jerusalem. And I was so afraid to come back. They will catch me and tell me, they will charge me, I think 350 shekels, and they will put me in prison. I was so afraid, but God helped me. They didn't stop me.
Probably we have to go back to what Jesus told us. Pray inside your room and close your door. Well, we'll do that for the moment, but nobody can prevent us from all the time looking towards Jerusalem and saying, next year in Jerusalem.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله.
إن هذا الخنق خنق ديني لأنه يمنعنا من الوصول إلى القدس للتعبد. وكم من رجل يبيت في جنوب الضفة العربية ويذهب للعمل في القدس أو في غيرها في الشمال. وكم أنثى وضعت على هذا الحاجز المشؤوم. وكم طفل فارق الحياة على هذا الحاجز المشؤوم. أللحيوان حق وحق الإنسان مهدر؟
East Jerusalem is a term usually used both by Israelis and Palestinians that refers to the territories annexed by Israel in 1967. But in fact, to refer to those territories as East Jerusalem is a misnomer. Because in fact, the vast majority of those areas that were annexed were not part until 1967 of East Jerusalem, until that time was run by Jordan. But rather they were part of 28 villages in the West Bank and also of 2 municipalities of Bethlehem and Bet Jala. Israel considers that East Jerusalem is an integral part of the State of Israel, in spite of all decisions made by the Security Council, in spite of the fact that it's a clear violation of international law. It's not one city but two. If you take any taxi and you ask them to bring you to certain neighborhood in East Jerusalem, they'll say you're crazy. They will not do it if they're from Israelis from West Jerusalem, and you ask them to go to Tzur Bacher or to Bet Hanina or to other places. And that is basically, particularly since the Intifada started, and it continues even today during the peace process. Now, besides that, you ask most Israelis what they think about Jerusalem, and they will say that it's indivisible, that all the city is holy and has to be, and there are all these roots of the Jewish roots, etc. But you ask them, where is Tzur Bacher? And they will say, where? They will think that you're talking about some place near Ramallah or near Bethlehem or near Gaza. They had no idea that many of the neighborhoods, they not only have never been there, but have even don't know where they are in the map. More than a third of the land of East Jerusalem that were annexed in 1967 have been confiscated by Israel for what Israel considers public purposes. The vast majority of that land belonged to Arabs. Israel, in its policy of land expropriation, it expropriated from the Palestinians practically exclusively, in order just to give to the Jews exclusively. Around 38,000 housing units have been constructed for Jewish neighborhoods, and not one single housing unit has been constructed in this land confiscated by Israel for Palestinians. This is a clear case of discrimination based on national identity. The systematic policy of discrimination applies not only to land expropriation and housing, but also to all forms of infrastructure in terms of roads, sewage, electricity, etc., etc. Anybody that just visits this city and goes from one neighbor to the other doesn't have to ask whether they're in a Jewish or a Palestinian neighborhood. It is very clear to anybody, just because the Jewish neighborhoods are usually very well established with roads and with electricity and with flowers and etc. And Palestinian neighborhoods often seem to go back to like 100 years ago, or to places which have not been developed in many places today in the third world.
والله صار ابني عمره 19 سنة اللي هو كبير، اجوا اعتقلوا في الليل، اجونا في الليل نص الليل واخذوه. بعد بقى كم من يوم اللي هم جايبين لي اياه في الليل، اما عمل دم وحالته يرثى إلها، بس لحظ يعني صدر ملان دم وحالته البين حالته ذابحين من الكتل وصاير نزيف معاه من مناخيره. كل الدار حايطة يهود وشنتات هيك وإشي. بقول أنا شوفي لا بقول ولا إشي. فأنا أجي المجندات ومجندين أطلعوني على دار جيراننا بالغصب، ونسفوا الدار كلها يتم أكملها. ظل لنا خزان مية، في خزان، قال جندي خلي هذا عشان يشربوا منه، قال لا هدوا، والجرافة راحت وأجت وهي زي ما انتم شايفين. وبتنا يشفيكوا شرنا عالردم والسقعة والمطر فوقنا. طب وين بدي أروح؟
Since the demolition of their home over 10 years ago, Khalid and her family have lived in their converted chicken shack. Her son spent 10 years in prison on charges of sabotage against a new Israeli settlement near the camp.
There have been a real speed of settlement activities, a huge expropriation of land, and let's not forget that land is the most important and basic issue in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict.
Since the 1970s, Israel has built a network of settlements and moved its own population into the territories in violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. The expenditures for these settlements were made possible by U.S. taxpayers who provide Israel with $5 billion annually. Israel also maintains total control over water, restricting Palestinian water use while giving unlimited access to the settlers.
The Oslo Accords gave the right to Israel to define the final status of this area unilaterally without negotiations with Palestinians, which is against the terms of the agreement. But if you dig deep into the text, you'll find nothing to prevent Israel from doing that.
In 1992, under international criticism, Prime Minister Rabin announced a freeze on Israeli settlements, but in fact, settlement building continued at 70% of its previous level, and the West Bank settler population increased from 100,000 to 150,000 in the next 4 years.
And we can see it from here, plenty of settlements, and this cannot be peace.
Michel, Warschawski, longtime Israeli activist for Palestinian rights.
You cannot have real autonomy while on the same time you have settlements and settlers in the autonomous territory. Settlers are citizens, are civilians. They go and with them they have the Israeli sovereignty. They move Israeli sovereignty everywhere. So it's making a joke of autonomy.
The Oslo Agreement split the Palestinian territory into 3 areas before their final status would be determined. Palestinians would control only Area A, the 7 largest Arab towns covering just 3% of the West Bank. Area B would be under joint control, and everything else, 70% of the West Bank, would remain under total Israeli control. Any further withdrawals would be at Israel's discretion.
The whole agreement was amended according to this one specific article. Because the settlement has to stay, and they will stay, then we are sorry, but there will be no withdrawal from Gaza, but only a redeployment. That there will be no withdrawal from the West Bank, but only redeployment. And that there will be Area A and B and C. All these long negotiations were long precisely because this article of settlements and keeping the settlements not only in the territory, but under total Israeli control, wherever they are moving, under Israeli sovereignty, and in a situation like an embassy outside the control of the Palestinian Authority, and when they are spread all over the West Bank and most of the Gaza Strip, it's making a nonsense of the concept of autonomy. There is no autonomy except autonomy on the people, but not on the territory.
I'm horrified by the news. We were together, a number of us, last night when the word came, and of course we immediately dispersed to go to our rooms and put on CNN. And we got there just in time to discover that he not only had been shot, but they just had the announcement of his death.
In November 1995, Israel's prime minister was gunned down by a right-wing opponent of the peace agreement.
Rabin's assassination was a trauma. It was a trauma of a tribe, in terms of a tribe whose a father was killed by a member of the tribe. It's sure that the young generation was moved even more than any other sectors, although beside the extreme right, the whole people were really shocked. The reaction of the young generation is still not very well understood. Part of it was kind of kitsch and the need to be together, the need for rituals. It had to do with things not directly to do with the assassination. But you can't deny that it also had to do with their realistic fears of more wars, with their realistic need, because they are the ones who are going to fight, need for a kind of ending the wars and kind of solution and kind of peace.
On the eve of his assassination, Rabin had begun the withdrawal of Israeli troops from West Bank towns, a year and a half behind schedule. His successor, Shimon Peres, continued the pullouts. Beginning in the northern town of Jenin, Palestinians celebrated the end of 3 decades of direct occupation and prepared to welcome the Palestinian police force. The transfer of authority was to culminate in Yasser Arafat's historic arrival during Christmas week in the town of Bethlehem.
When the Palestinian Authority entered for the first time, it was a very great day. I never imagined that my generation will see this day. We thought that it's too far from us, but we never left lost the hope, and we worked all the time to see this day. But we were working for a very far future. I saw them myself. I shook hands with a lot of them when they passed in front of my restaurant. When your brother, your neighbor, your son is in the charge of the stability in your town, in your village, in your city, in the police station, it's very great. It's very great. It's the beginning to feel like a human being. It's the beginning.
ليلي
Arafat stood before the Palestinians as their leader returned from exile and repeated his long-standing pledge. The peace agreement would end in a Palestinian state, with its capital in East Jerusalem. But Israel had other plans for Jerusalem. In the Palestinian elections the following month, Israel used a variety of tactics to negate Arab claims to the city.
Oslo says that anybody who has a Jerusalem residency will be able to vote in the elections for the Palestinian Council, but no one from Jerusalem will be able to stand for election. Why? Because they want to prove the point that Jerusalem's status is non-negotiable. Sovereignty over Jerusalem is non-negotiable. They weigh every single thing and the implication of every decision they make.
Israel insisted that Palestinians from Jerusalem could vote only at the city's post offices. They could then be said to have voted symbolically by absentee ballot, so that the leadership they were electing would not have even an implicit claim to the occupied city. Among the few women elected to the council, one is familiar to Western audiences.
So I'll ask Dr. Hanan Ashrawi to...
Thank you. Thank you very much. We can't have men in our way. I mean, I couldn't resist that. I'm sorry. Yes. To go and vote in a post office was like going into a military establishment in Israel. The border guards, the police, and so on were more than the voters, extremely intimidating. From the beginning, there were clashes with people, and they arrested the Palestinian observers. They were intimidating, they were misleading others. I came to one post office where an illiterate woman was being told that because she couldn't read or write, she couldn't vote. Now, it wasn't any of their business to do that, to interfere. And we had regulations as to she had to fight. This old woman standing there fighting the police and the border guards, telling them, no, I have the right to vote and I want somebody with me to vote. Again, the closure. Beit Safafa, Sur Bahir, and so on were being asked to vote in Bethlehem. But then immediately you had checkposts on the road to Bethlehem. And they turned back the first buses. So we had to call, there was a big uproar, we called the observers, we called the Central Elections Committee and so on. They said, okay, we will let the buses go through, but they stopped the buses and they took down the ID numbers. So they were terrified, they went back, told people. So we had to go again and tell them, no, you can go and vote. I spent all morning just on that checkpoint. They tried every trick in the book to prevent Palestinians in Jerusalem from voting.
To participate in general election, political elections here in my land, it was just a dream. Even I know that you have little freedom to work, but I trust them and I trust my people that they will do more than what is permitted. What is permitted is nothing.
The Palestinians discovered that they are actually not a smooth, harmonious geographic piece of land, but they discovered that they are islands divided by Israeli forces. The island of Nablus, the island of Jenin, the island of Tulkarm, the island of Deir Sharaf, that's a village, and every village and every town will be an island of its own. So they discovered that they have been cut into hundreds of pieces. And also, they discovered that the Legislative Council is not a legislative council, actually. It's just a council. And it's not meant to legislate because it doesn't have the right to legislate, particularly on major issues, like the issue of sovereignty, the issue of security, the issue of international relations, and so on. They probably have certain rights to legislate on daily life issues. If we want to talk about Palestinian democracy, there is no democracy at all. If you want to challenge this thing philosophically, we might end up saying that the United States itself is not democratic. Probably there is a kind of a dictatorship, especially for the mass media. And if the United States is so, how would the Palestinian Authority be? It's completely undemocratic. It's far away from democracy. It's a very, it's a dictatorship.
The torture methods which used by the preventive security forces is very similar to the methods which used by the Israeli security forces. The Palestinian interrogators today were the people who suffered from the Israeli torture in the past. So today, unfortunately, they implementing these methods on their own people, on their brothers.
Israel knows that the PLO, that Arafat increased the number of security people, the police, to 30,000. And about any other violation of the agreement, Israel will do its best, and she can do to get rid of it or to cancel it, not when it comes to the police. Why? From the beginning, Rabin said it's a very good solution because here we are going to have Palestinian oppressing Palestinians with a regime openly brutal, openly violating human rights, which will do our job.
Yasser Arafat established, since he came to Gaza, a state security court. And they call it the Midnight Court. They are bringing the people in the midnight and they sentence them for 3, 5, 7 or a life imprisonment without to give these people the opportunity to appoint any lawyer, without to present any draft of charges for these people.
I was shot on the 20th of August 1995. That was because of an article I wrote in a Ghassan newspaper, in which I said that there is no democracy in the Palestinian society. There is only dictatorship. And I spoke namely of Arafat. And I said he is the sole dictator. And he is the only one who decides, even on very small matters. And nobody else in this country decides. So he said some people to shoot me. I was on foot. A couple of people just walked into the street, and they asked me whether I was Dr. Qassem. I told them no. I was very cautious anyhow, because there were previous threats. So I told them no. They didn't believe me. Yeah, I started to look for a certain kind of to hide out, hide away. But I couldn't see. Yeah, they were in a hurry of their affair. Anyhow, they shot at me using a pistol. I was hit with 4 bullets. That was a message. That was a message for me and for other Palestinian intellectuals. That's just shut up, don't say anything. If you do, we'll shoot you.
After signing the Oslo peace agreement, Israel stepped up the pace of its land confiscations to make way for an extensive new system of settler roads. These roads will link the settlements together and at the same time serve to divide the Palestinians into isolated areas. This is a clear violation of the treaty, which states that the West Bank and Gaza are to be considered a single territorial unit whose integrity will be preserved during the interim period. But the scale of new construction signals Israel's intent to remain on the occupied land, separate from the Palestinians but unequal.
Separation without self-determination is apartheid. What is apartheid? The translation of the concept of apartheid is separation. What is the intention, or seems to be the intention of the Israeli leaders, is to crystallize under the name of a Palestinian state a situation of apartheid. A state or territories which will be autonomous, which will have their own self-rule and their own police, but under the total control, not only on the level of security, but on the level of borders, economy, what enters, what goes out, on the level of unilateral decided agreements, relation between Israel and Palestine. This is apartheid. It's not whether it will develop into apartheid. This is apartheid.
Israel justified its road-building project by claiming it would also benefit the Palestinians. This massive highway near Bethlehem was completed in 1996, built on Palestinian land. But when Palestinians tried to drive on it, they were stopped by Israeli soldiers. The road, they were told, was for Jews only.
The main symbol of the post-Oslo situation is the checkpoint. The checkpoint and the permit. And this is a paradox. While at a time during the occupation there was more or less freedom of movement for Palestinians and Israelis everywhere, now Palestinians cannot move.
Okay, can I go with him just to bring Give him the luggage to help him. Where the fuck? هاي ساكن بيت لغم، هاي التاكسي there. The taxi is there. ويروح بس اللي هناك ما صار. هو عنده 1 2
ما يتازوتي.
خذ ان شاء الله. خذ هويتي برجع. لا. خذ هويتي برجع. انا ما بقدر. إذا تقدر تنادي التاكسي طب ناديه هي. إذا بدك ياخذ الشنطة ويلا. طب ناديه ما هو بيعرفش التاكسي أنا بعرف. لا. أما أنا بعرفه. أنا ما بقدر. Excuse me, I know the taxi is there. Okay, look. Could you look there just? Hey, excuse me. It's there. Look there. Look there. Look there. Just have a look.
سوي له غزومه
احكي عربي شوف الهويه بديش اروح انا هي سيارتي بديش اروح هي التاكسي ناديه طيب لو call him just call the taxi
خلص فيش طريق
انا افهمني انت مش طريق بدي اروح الزلمه بدي اعطيه التاكسي بعرفش التاكسي
فيش طريق
ما بديش اروح انا ما بدي اروح
ساكن في بدليكان
ما بديش اروح انا بدي اوصله للتاكسي
يروح للتاكسي
ما بيعرفش التاكسي
بلاش شو بيعرفش تاكسي وين صار
ايطالي شو مالك انت كيف على الفاضي تحكي شوي انت انت مات أدوني انت اسمح يا عمي هي طب نادي طب ناديه هيو هناك. بس اطلع علي اطلع علي
انا ما اخذت السباب يا اخوان. لا تلبك يا اخوان السباب ازاي؟
ما فهمش عبران فيش معي عبران
يعني روح من هون خلاص. زوز يلا روح.
There is a taxi there, and this guy he doesn't know the taxi. I want to show him the taxi to get him to the airport. He needs to go to the airport, and he doesn't know the taxi. I told him to call the taxi from there, just to tell him and to give him the. This is not the way. This is not the way.
I feel disgust, I feel anger, I feel rage, I feel horror. But to have a knee-jerk violent reaction against them, it doesn't solve anything, it continues it. But I think that's what's going to happen. I'm afraid that's what's going to happen.
In February and March, more than 60 people died in a series of suicide bombing attacks against Israeli civilians. These bombings were carried out by militant Palestinians from the Islamist group Hamas, hoping to derail the peace agreement and seeking retaliation for assassination of one of their leaders.
هذا اللي انتحر اللي راح ينتحر أنا ما بأيد الشيء بلاكن راح ينتحر من ذيك المعاش لأنه راح ينتحر في بلده في بلاده راح ينتحر في أرضه لأنه بقول لك هم يعيشوا على أرضي وأنا لا وأنا والله ماني مأيدة بحبش الأم اليهودية تبكي والأم العربية تبكي وإحنا جماعة بدنا سلام.
Escalating the Palestinian struggle against the Israeli occupation in such a way of indiscriminate killing is devastating not only for Israelis but for us, and also is threatening us that at some point such senseless people might lead us into a civil war in the Palestinian areas. On the other hand, the Israeli attitudes, which is reflected by the policy of what's called the peace government in Israel towards Palestinians, is really reflecting the old Zionist strategy of dealing with this area. I haven't seen any reconciliation in such attitudes, but I have seen collective punishment becoming the major policy in Israel.
Israel imposed a total closure on the Palestinian autonomous zones, confining all 2 million Palestinians to their hometowns or villages. Along with Arafat's police, Israel carried out mass arrests of Palestinians associated with Islamist groups. 10% of students at Birzeit University were arrested on a single night when soldiers raided their homes. Fuar refugee camp, home to 2 of the suicide bombers, was placed under a 2-week curfew.
والله صار علينا منع التجول بسبب هذول الانتحارية. ما كانش عندنا لا طحين ولا سكر ولا رز ولا إشي، فإحنا أول كم من يوم يعني مضيناهن على كاسة الشاي، والناس عانت الويلات والحسرات. بعدين في الليل طق طق على الابواب، طق ونفتح لهم وشو بدكوا يقلبوا هالحوايج ويجوا طالعين، او اذا عندك ولد يضربوه. هذا ما بصير، هذا بصير ما بصير.
أنا ما كنت أصدق إنه أخوي راح انتحر أو راح سوى عملية استشهاد. اليوم طلع قرار في هدم البيت، والساعة إحنا بنستنى في الرد لأن بدهم يهدموا البيت. طب أنا بهدموهم حد يكون ابني صغير وشوفوا هدم البيت، شو بده يسوي في اليهود؟ شو بده يحقد أكثر من اللازم، ما بدش السلام. فإذا بدهم يشوفوا الصغير إذا بده يشوف البيت بده ينهد، بده كمان يروح يفجر حاله، كمان يهدوا كمان البيت الخيمة هذه يجي يقوموها. هاي رد الفعل تبعنا.
The Israelis destroyed the house the following day.
The crackdown on Hamas, if it's meant to weaken the Islamic trend, I think they are wrong. On the contrary, they are helping. The more dictatorship there is, the more expansion for the Islamists. They are helping. And actually, the United States is helping toward this end. The United States is thinking of cracking down on the Muslims instead of trying to understand them and cooperate with them. So these kinds of actions are not going to help. On the contrary, there will be more underground activity, I believe, and more public expansion and more public support for the Islamic movements.
3 months after the suicide bombings, Israelis elected a new prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, an outspoken opponent of the Oslo peace agreement. He extended the closure of the Palestinian areas and announced the construction of thousands of new housing units for settlers. In East Jerusalem, he stepped up the demolition of Palestinian homes and ordered the destruction of a community center for the disabled. In September 1996, Netanyahu opened a tunnel beneath the Muslim holy sites. This proved to be the spark that ignited mass demonstrations in Jerusalem and throughout the Palestinian areas.
If there is a peace between two persons, they must be equal. If I feel that I have no dignity in this peace process, then I have to make the revolution again. I hope that the peace process will give everybody his rights and his dignity, so as not to give him the opportunity or the reason to go and to think in the war again. This is the true peace, the real peace.
This agreement of surrender, this agreement of humiliation, is inevitably going to rise another intifada, which the one before it will be nothing in comparison.
The September uprising brought the worst fighting in the occupied territories since the 1967 war. Demonstrations turned to gun battles between Israeli soldiers and armed Palestinian police. Fighting raged for over 3 days before it was put down by Israeli firepower. 15 Israeli soldiers and 86 Palestinians lost their lives.
You can't go on in oppressing. You can't win forever. I believe in human beings. I believe in their need for freedom. So nothing is what we see now is going to last forever.
احنا يلا جينا نعيش اهمل العيش وهم عايشين كويس. انا يلي داري مهدوده شو حققت؟ ولا حاجه. وقاسينا العلقم وشربنا العلقم وبنقول يا رب يا ربي تقف معانا. وانا بدي دار من الرئيس عرفات او من اياتها واحد. انا ظل في غرفه دجاج. الله اكبر، في غرفه دجاج. انا بيقبلوا رؤساء العرب يعيشوا زي ماني عايش في غرفه دجاج؟ ها لا. احنا مرحبا يا سلام، اهلا وسهلا بالسلام، مش استسلام، سلام. مظبوط؟ مظبوط. عفوا. كويس؟
كويس كويس.
ايوه.
It was good.
Yeah, very good, very good. At least a certain group.
That's our independence. Yeah.
If this agreement fails anywhere, it will fail here. So this is Hebron, the west. Sorry, I'm just going to do this. If this agreement fails anywhere, it will fail here. So this is Hebron, the West Bank city, where Jews and Arabs live in an atmosphere of bitterness and hostility. Reconciliation remains the most distant of dreams. If this agreement fails anywhere, it will fail here. This is Hebron, the West Bank city, where Jews and Arabs live in an atmosphere of bitterness and